just getting set up here.
I think so.
The bottom.
Good afternoon. This is our welcome to you from the Bush School. We're pleased to have you as a participating member of our class in public budgeting. Our class members know generally about you. We know that you're the President of the Treasury Board of Canada, active in Canadian legislation, and an experienced public servant over the last 3 decades or so. We saw in some of the advanced material that you're also working to master rock guitar. We're not going to ask any comments about that.
No, I wouldn't want to dumb down my exposition by starting to bring my guitar in, so don't worry about that.
Right. Yes, sir. We understand that you would like to make some opening remarks, and that we might be able, with your permission, to follow up with some questions.
Sure, that would be great.
So,
Dr. Graham, is it?
Yes, sir. Certainly is. So the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Graham, to you and to your class. Let me just start with the apology. I'm so disappointed I could not be there with you in person. As your seminar is no doubt aware, I have both executive and legislative functions. In Canada, as part of the British tradition, we fuse those together rather than having separation. And so I am a constituency person who, with a vote in Parliament as well as an executive member of the Executive Council, otherwise known as the Cabinet, as President of the Treasury Board. And so sometimes, despite my best efforts, there are votes that come up, and then we are all under the thumb of the Chief Government Whip when he needs the votes, and he needed the votes today. So my apologies to you that I could not be there in person, and all I can say is that's just the hazards of public life sometimes, which I'm sure your students are well aware of. But I did want to have this opportunity, through the miracle of modern technology, to talk to you through this video conferencing method. And it's actually quite ironic that we're using this because as part of my reforms to the public service, I have been encouraging through carrots and sticks the greater use of video conferencing. We actually cut the travel budgets of the public service by about $40 million and said that money's out, but here are more avenues for video conferencing and telepresence, which is also very, very useful as well. And so it's what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and here I am using video conferencing rather than traveling to your neck of the woods. Now, I do want to go over what President of the Treasury Board means. One of my lines is that in the United States, I'm incredibly important because I have both President and Treasury in my name at the same time. But I did want to give you a sense of what President of the Treasury Board is, because more or less, think of it as a chief operating officer. Of course, we have a chief executive officer. In a corporate context, that would be the Prime Minister or the President in your case. And we have a chief financial officer. In our case, that's the Minister of Finance. But you need someone that actually runs the systems that make government work, and that's the President of the Treasury Board, kind of like a chief operating officer. Although I do have other functions as well. I'm also kind of head of HR in the sense that I negotiate all of the collective agreements with the public sector unions at the federal level. And I'm very heavily involved in IT as well, because the Chief Information Officer reports to me. So I have all of these different functions: the budgeting function, the IT function, the HR function. Only one paycheck. I want to make that clear. But I do have all of these functions. Now, as I mentioned, the Treasury Board is responsible for the federal public service and the management of government. That's definitely part of my role and responsibility. I should also mention that the size of our public service is somewhat smaller than what you're used to in the United States of America. A Treasury Board is the direct employer of about 200,000 people. These are mostly unionized employees. There's an additional 60,000 that work in what we call separate agencies. Each separate agency is its own employer, but they are increasingly coming under the same policy suite that we have at the Treasury Board, because we wanted to have consistency across the board. So that's the size of the federal public service, and of course, the Canadian population size is about a ninth the size of the U.S. population. We've got about 35 million people, about the population of California. So that gives you a kind of sense of the context. And the other part of the context is, despite having that relatively smaller population, our surface area in Canada is very large. It's the second largest surface area in the world, second only to Russia. So that gives you a bit of a context in terms of the things that we have to still provide to citizens in sometimes very remote and rural areas. And when I say remote, I mean think of Alaska, but even further closer to the North Pole than there, and places where you have like maybe several dozen people, within a flight of 3 or 4 hours, that kind of thing. But I would say as well, though, that our two countries share a lot in common, and that's important too. Obviously, we've got the foundational things that make our democracy run, our belief in democracy, our pluralism, the idea of the rule of law being paramount. And I would say, if you'd allow me to talk generally about Canada-U.S., we have these strong connections between our countries, interpersonal connections, a critically strong trade relationship, and a bilateral relationship where we are sharing the challenges of a globalized world, both economically, but also, hey, come on in. There we go. She's coming in too. Good. So we have these economic bilateral relationships which are critically strong for both countries, but we also have diplomatic and political initiatives. And just to give you one example, just in our House of Commons in the last couple of days, we've been debating our plans, our government's plans to contribute to President Obama's mission in Iraq, Syria, countering ISIS. So that's just one example. We had over 2,500 troops in Afghanistan for many years, in the most dangerous part of Afghanistan, in Kandahar province. So again, we've got a lot that we do together to make the world safer, and we learn from one another. And in my area, of course, that means learning on how to modernize policies and practices, on how government operates, whether it's the federal public service, but also the mechanics of how governments operate and deliver better services at a period of incredible rapid change. And that's the other thing too. The change that is occurring at breakneck speed in our economies, and that, of course, impacts on people's expectations of what government can provide, but also how government itself sees itself and how they want to deliver those services. So we both have to adapt and adjust with the times. That is critically important. Our businesses have to do that. Our manufacturers have to do that, and they have to invest and grow. But our public institutions have to do that in terms of innovation, new thinking, the way we do business, how we achieve all that it is possible to achieve. So we do that, of course, in the same context of the lowest possible cost as well, because we all face budget pressures, and that isn't going to go away anytime soon. So that's a way of saying that in the Canadian context, we have been working hard to modernize government operations through a number of important initiatives, and what I'm going to do is kind of try to touch on some of those initiatives and the progress we've made in 4 specific areas that I want to touch on today: regulation, cost containment, technology, and human resources management. So I'll touch on all those, and then I'm sure we'll have some time for questions. Let me briefly talk about regulation, because this is something that all small businesses and citizens care about. It's one of my priority areas on changing how government operates. Red tape, unnecessary regulation. All of these terms apply to things that ultimately have an impact on jobs and growth. And we calculated that complying with the information obligations of 12 of the most common federal provincial, and municipal regulations in just 5 sectors. So that's a small subset of the totality of regulation. That works out to $1 billion a year right there. Just one cross section of it. And so for the past couple of years, we've had something called the Red Tape Reduction Action Plan. It was introduced a couple of years ago, and it's basically an ambitious agenda to reduce the regulatory burden for Canadians and businesses, make it easier for business to do business with the regulators, improve the service, and the predictability within the regulatory system. What we're trying to do is get rid of business irritants, and this is areas ranging from tax compliance, payroll, labor, trade. All of these things put costs on businesses, and we're moving to more single windows and electronic submissions. I know this is something that the U.S. government is working on as well. One of the things that we've put in that I'm particularly proud of is this, what we call the 1-for-1 rule. That really is the cornerstone of our reform agenda. And basically what the 1-for-1 rule does is place strict controls on the growth of red tape. Now, how does it do that? The basic rule is, under the 1-for-1 rule, if a regulator within the federal government wants a new regulation, they have to find another regulation to take off the books. And we do it in a unique way. We actually monetize the impact of the new regulation on small business. How much is it going to cost to comply with the new regulation? How many hours of paperwork is it going to take for the business to comply? Other aspects of cost. We monetize the value, and then we say to the regulator, whatever branch of government or agency wants to add this regulation, you got to find a regulation within your ambit to take off the books of equal or greater value. And we give you a certain amount of time to do that. Some things are exempt, just not to scare you. So if it's a regulation relating to health or safety, clearly we don't want to stop that regulation from taking, from being part of our regulatory envelope. But many regulations do not have that impact. And so they are simply ways that government or the public service have decided to deal with a problem. And I get this all the time in the culture of government. Politicians might bound through the door, or staffers. We've got a problem. It's on the front page of the paper, or you click online here, it's there. And then the politician turns to the public service and says, "Well, how are we going to deal with this problem?" And they say, "Well, just pass this regulation and we'll deal with the problem." Well, that might be one way to deal with a problem in public policy, but it's not the only way. And sometimes it's the lazy way to deal with a public policy issue. And so what we're trying to do is push a change in culture where that's not automatically the only way you deal with a problem, because they seem to have impacts on small business, usually unintended, but they are certainly tangible impacts. So just by instituting this 1-for-1 rule, we're starting to change the culture of the place. We've saved over $21 million and about 290,000 person hours for small business. That works out to 33 years that has saved, lifted the burden from small business. And in fact, this week we're debating in our House of Commons a bill that I am putting forward to legislate this, because right now it's a rule of government, but the 1-for-1 rule is not embedded in legislation. So we're going to be the first. It's going to be the first time in the world where this is legislated. There are a couple of other jurisdictions that have tried this, UK being one, but we're the first ones to make it as a permanent feature of regulatory system. So I wanted to share that with you, and really it does send a clear message that we're open for business, and it sends a cultural message to our public service that they've got to do things differently. Second, I want to talk a little bit about cost containment. Obviously, this is part of how we tell the world that we are a jurisdiction in which people can invest and grow jobs and live their lives, and how we want our companies to succeed. We want them to hire more people. And a cornerstone of that is returning to a balanced budget. Now, balanced budgets, I don't have to tell anyone in this room, how important balanced budgets are. They help keep interest rates low. They instill business and investor confidence as well as consumer confidence in the economy. And all of these things create a virtuous circle where economic growth and job creation become the virtuous circle rather than the vicious circle of the downward spiral. So Canada is in a somewhat different situation than the USA, I know. We are forecasting in just a few months' time that we will be in a healthy surplus. We will have eliminated the deficit that was ramped up, just as it was in your case, with shovel-ready projects. And just like your TARP did 5 and 6 years ago, we had similar infrastructure programs, and growth of the public service, and new policies to deal with the unemployed, these kinds of things. All of that has been, we've been finding ways to not cut services to people, but at the same time reduce, in many cases, the back office operations of government, the things that are not service-oriented or frontline to the individual citizen, but the kind of the guts of how the government operates. So in 2011, I was tasked to lead a cross-departmental, cross-governmental effort to find the savings. It meant reviewing billions, tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of programs. It required each federal department and agency to examine their own efficiency and effectiveness of their own programs, their own services, and activities within their organizations. And we reviewed those processes. And it was a lot of hard work. We reviewed 650 separate proposals for budget reductions. And we delivered on it. About 7% of that envelope was cut in terms of direct program expenditures. And it really has made a difference. We estimate that we're estimating about a $6 billion surplus in the next fiscal year, starting March 31st. That would have actually been a $13 billion deficit if we had not done the constraint on spending and spending review that we had done. So the delta is about $19.5 billion, almost $20 billion. In our context, that's significant, and it was important. We also looked at our internal administration. We looked at ways to make sure that spending decisions in government of new and existing spending were tightened. We look at the sunsetter programs, these programs that were created sometimes decades ago for a limited period of time, and they're still there, and we've done a cyclical review of these sunsetter programs to see whether we actually really need the programs anymore. And of course, we're embracing technology and modernized government operations where we possibly can. So let me talk about the third thing I want to talk about, which is IT consolidation and cloud. We are collaborating with industry right now to make us more efficient through new technologies like cloud computing, obviously. And of course, I believe very strongly we're really at a sweet spot right now of technology adoption. It really is a brave new era where we no longer have to choose between these two different goals. Adopt the latest technology or save money. That used to be the conundrum for people in government as well as in the private sector. We really are at a point now where we can have the best of both worlds, and in fact, one helps beget the other. So when you look at developments in cloud computing, for instance, or mobile devices or web platforms, they are, of course, transforming the way individuals and organizations communicate, how they collaborate, how they share information, and more it's becoming possible for organizations like the Government of Canada to adopt these new technologies that consolidate common platforms and at the same time deliver better services in a more efficient manner. So we are adopting those. We've seen this change in the private sector, obviously, and these private sector organizations are also complex, and they have the same technology challenges that we have as government. And so we are rolling out these transformation plans really in a consolidated way, and basically the organization is being transformed as a result of that. So as president of the Treasury Board, I am tasked with this responsibility to find ways to deliver better services in a more cost-effective way. And from my perspective, I have this continued collaboration with departments, and I find that IT reform is actually one of those rare issues where everyone agrees it's absolutely necessary. And so we are taking this cross-governmental approach for the first time and breaking down these small fiefdoms that have built up on the IT side, just as in many other sides of government operations, and using our collective size to save money and ultimately provide Canadians with better, more consolidated services. So that's an ongoing collaboration. I can tell you, just as an example, my organization is leading efforts to help us find ways to better simplify, standardize, and consolidate administrative functions and operations within and across government. That works with HR functions, with finance functions, and web content. All of those things we're consolidating. Eliminating duplication, eliminating complexity, allowing for reinvestment because we save money for more innovative solutions and services that put Canadian businesses and citizens' needs at the center of design and delivery. That wasn't done before. As you can imagine in government, when you look at a website, for instance, government is all about, well, what is my department or agency, and here's our website. But, citizens don't think that way. They have a problem that needs solving. So we're trying to think like the citizen and make sure our web services, for instance, mirror the psychology of people who want problems solved rather than the structures that are found in government, which are completely irrelevant to most citizens. So we are consolidating the processes and the web presence. We're going from 1,500 websites to one site, just one site, Canada.ca. That's all you need to know. And then there's got to be a kick-ass, search engine so that people can find what they need from Canada.ca. So that's looking at it from the citizen point of view, rather than, as I say, organizing the websites around the structure of government. Let me talk a little bit more about how this is important, because enterprise-wide approaches really are how that's the philosophy around this. So we're looking at this not only just from the website per se, but our email services, our networks, our data centers. All of those are going to be enterprise as well. So we created a new organization within government called Shared Services Canada, a new department, consolidated the IT resources and personnel within that department, basically of the 43 largest federal departments and organizations. That represents about 95% of the government's IT expenditures, all consolidated in one place rather than stovepiped out. And we're doing a bunch of different things, including consolidating email, consolidating data centers. Our data center transformation initiative will take 485 data centers and collapse that to a maximum of 7. Why is that important? Well, it's more efficient. It reduces the number of servers by 4%. It's more environmental because these data centers consume massive amounts of energy. It creates savings of about $100 million, or about 15% of the total cost upon completion of the program. And it's safer when it comes to cybersecurity as well. And that, of course, is an increasing fixation with all governments everywhere as the cyber attacks only grow. So the cyber attacks work on the weak chain link of the fence kind of approach. You're only as strong as your weakest link. So if we can consolidate and make our defenses stronger, it helps us counteract cyber attacks. So all of these things are important. We continue to look to moving to cloud-based services. I don't think I'll get into that kind of detail at this point, but basically, just as the U.S. is moving to cloud and cloud first, UK is doing the same thing, Australia is doing the same thing. We see the potential to increase government efficiency and service delivery by using the cloud as well, and we will continue to be. I think your terminology is FedRAMP. We're looking at that as well, and we're seeing that as a basis of our approach as well. Let me just talk about open data, because this is something I'm really jazzed up about. I think that this is important in how government's going to operate as well. Government collects data, always has, since government was conceptualized by human beings. They collect information, and that's a normal way of government. And the way it's worked for millennia is government collects information, and they take the key and lock the door on the information, because that's the government's information. It's not your information, it's the government's information. There's a whole movement in the world now which turns that on its head and says, let's push out this information, this data, to the public, to researchers, to civic organizations, to entrepreneurs, and this will benefit society. Whenever you look at your weather app, that's because there's government data that's made available. GPS was created because of initially government data. So open data is the way to promote entrepreneurship, it's the way to promote research, job creation, innovation, and ultimately economic growth. We know that, your country knows that, and so what we're doing is making our default setting in government increasingly that government information has to be free, freely available, and much more accessible. Of course, there's always privacy issues that you have to deal with, national security issues, but within those boundaries, there's a lot that can be done. And the general consensus is that there are trillions of dollars of new economic value for our economies around the world if open data continues to grow at its current speed. As a subset of big data, but it's government pushing the boundaries of the data that is made available. So we adopted our first action plan on open government in 2012 through some widespread consultations. We heard that Canadians want more data made available in usable and accessible formats, so that's what we've been doing, creating a license agreement that works and is compatible with other jurisdictions as well. And we've made over 200,000 data sets available at data.gc.ca just as a start. The multitudes of government organizations participating, understanding that they've got to curate that data, but just having 200,000 data sets, even as a start, with a rural edge, leading edge government license regime, means that the data is available, it's free, it's Statistics Canada data, it's environmental data, it's health data, on a metadata basis, it's geospatial data. All of this stuff is available. And one of the things I'm most proud of is, thinking outside the box and saying, okay, how can we use this data? And, the original, the approach that would have been used, say, 10 years ago would have been, well, there's a government department that is going to look into how we're going to use the data. Bureaucrat X14 somewhere in some office building is going to come up with a proposal. And what we decided to do was, in the world of apps and hackathons and appathons, push it out to the coding world and say, here's all this data. What can you do with it? So we created a contest, this hackathon, the Canadian Open Data Experience, or CODE, and then we got some people to put in some cash and prizes, because you're dealing with 22-year-olds with a bit of time on their hands, but they want to know that there's cash and prizes. So we came up with a $25,000 first prize, second prize, and third prize. We had some private sector sponsors, and we just went out to the coding world, the universities, the engineering departments, mathematics departments, computer science departments, and the coding world generally, and said, hey, we got a contest. There's this open data. Check it out. And we were hoping for maybe 100 people, first year. Anyway, over 900 participated and made it the #1 hackathon in the country by a country mile. And lo and behold, they came up with over 100 apps using government data, healthcare apps, immigrant settlement apps, how to use our national parks apps. All of this stuff was available. So over 100 of these new apps were created just by creating this hackathon venue. So I was quite excited about that. It was great to see young people involved with government on a common theme or a common objective. And we're going to continue to do this in the years ahead as well. We think it's very, very positive. So that's just another example of how this IT, this open data, can be useful for the economy and for research and for innovation and for better organization, for the years ahead. So I think I've got one more topic to very quickly go through, which is HR management, changing the way government operates, changing the way the workforce operates as well. We know that people are our most valuable asset. We know that public servants help us get the business done, the business of government done every day, and they have to be part of our team if we're going to have real transformation of our economy and of how government operates within the economy. The public service is the front line for that. And we're very fortunate in Canada. Our government employs some of the best Canadians and the brightest people on the planet, quite frankly. They work in more than 200 federal organizations and dozens of different occupations, not only throughout Canada, but as you view it, they're there around the world. I mean, you have embassies, right? Every country has embassies. Canada has an embassy in Washington and, of course, consul offices around the country, including in Texas. And so they've got to be part of the team. And we have more lines of business and points of service than any other company or organization in the country. We know that. And so how you manage those people, it really is incumbent for us to continue to manage them properly, to make sure that they understand the focus is better public service, that it can be the best that it can be for Canadians. And one of the things that I did was performance management, one of these ideas. It's an important concept for sound human resource practice. So what is performance management? Well, it's a government-wide regime to help employees. I know this sounds simple, but sometimes the simple things are the things the government forgets. To make sure that each and every employee knows what her contribution is to the objectives of government, what our expectations are for increased productivity, increased efficiency. Here are your goals. Here are the corporate goals, if you will, or the government-wide goals. Here's your role in making that happen. And here's how we're going to judge you. I know that sounds simple and obvious, but it wasn't being done on a systematic basis in government before we had this approach. So it instills a culture of continuous improvement. It makes sure that employees know how to get a raise or how to get a promotion. So they have the right incentive and they get the right signals from government. It's a very simple thing, but it's necessary if you're going to have people working as a team for a common approach. I'm doing a number of other things as well, but let me conclude by saying that part of my role is to make sure that federal public institutions are able to meet the general needs of the public. That's ultimately what it comes down to. People rely on government for vital programs and services. They want to make sure that their needs and expectations are met, not only today, but obviously in the future and for future generations. And so I've said to public servants, be part of this challenge. This is a challenge that we face. Things are different now than they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Look at your work, rethink the way you do things and how you do them, so that government as a whole can provide the best services in the most efficient and effective manner possible. So that's the challenge, and I've encouraged them to bring forward innovative ideas, do things differently, and I really am confident that this kind of approach will deliver some great accomplishments for Canadians, and really make sure that we are in sync with the Canadians' aspirations and expectations. So I've taken a lot of time, I know that, but thank you for listening, and I'm very keen to start the dialogue now, but thank you for hearing what I have to say.
Thank you very much.
Sure, I have a question for you.
Can you please introduce yourself?
My name is Alan Blanche. I'm a second-year student here at Bush School. Let's see here. Here's a kind of interesting question. Does the Canada's bilingual nature complicate the budgeting process at all?
Complicate is a strong word. It's a reality. Any publication from the federal government has to be in both official languages, and any web presence, any online activity that is official government business has to be in both languages, and so that's an expectation. And what happens is in the delivery of government services, it's basically a where numbers warrant rule. So if you're in a community that is 99% one language and not the other, then there's no expectation that by the 1% that they can have services delivered in their minority language. But if the population is more divided linguistically, then there is an expectation that the service can be provided in both languages by someone. Like it doesn't have to be the same person. Not every public servant has to be officially bilingual, although it is encouraged. And if you want to get promoted up the ladder, it certainly helps. But certainly the service has to be available. So if you're at a walk into a government office in Montreal or Ottawa, just to give two examples, and the person at the counter can't speak in your language, someone else has to be close by to be able to communicate with you in your maternal language. So it's the reality of how we deliver services. There's that expectation. There have been court cases that make this clear, that this expectation cannot be chipped away at. It has to be nurtured. And part of our responsibility as a federal government is to promote minority language services throughout the country. So in the province of Quebec, which of course is unilingually French officially, there is a substantial minority population of English speakers, and so they have an expectation of federal services in English, and they indeed get those. Similarly, in parts of the province of Ontario, where I reside, there are communities like cities and regions where there is a significant French-speaking population, and they get services in French. So it is more costly. I will grant you that, but it is an expectation, and it's the price you pay for having that linguistic duality.
Thank you, Minister.
Minister Clement, thank you for joining us today. My name is Matthew Watson. I'm a second-year student at the Bush School studying public service and administration. And we know right now, at least in the United States, public perception of government, of the public service is remarkably low, especially among young citizens of the United States. And I was wondering what public perception is like in Canada, if it's any different, especially among young Canadians, and if so, why you think that is.
Yeah, I think that it depends on the circumstances of the question. That's a political answer for you. I would say that people have high expectations on service delivery, and their individual experience, by and large, with the public service is a positive one. Collectively, sometimes, when the public sector unions, for instance, when they make some of their public communications, the reaction of a lot of people is, you've got a pretty good job there. So why are you creating trouble? So it depends on the context in that way. Let me talk particularly about young people, though, because I think this is critically important. We have reduced the size of the public service in the last few years, mostly through attrition. But one of the things that I made sure was not done was that we had a hiring freeze. I didn't want a hiring freeze. And that's critically important because we have to continue to attract young people, graduates and people who maybe have some wealth of experience or just out of grad school, whatever, to apply to the public service and to be part of the public service. So even as we were downsizing the public service, we were continuing to hire. And I think that's critically important because that's how you get new ideas, that's how you get a lot of innovation, that's how you avoid having a cadre gap in your public service. Because if you do a hiring freeze for 3 years, 10 years down the line, you're going to be short managers, I guarantee you. A previous government did that in the 90s in Canada, and it created a real problem, experiential problem, and just a management problem within the public service. So we continue to get out there to advertise, to encourage young people to join the public service. That's a valuable career. It's one that we value and that they should value as well. And I think that's the right thing to do. I think it's a very positive thing for our country. It has to be the right size of the public service, and it has to be, as I said, when the public service is compensated, it has to be within, earshot or spitting distance of what people in their everyday lives are experiencing. If it's too far removed by salary or benefits from what the average Canadian is experiencing, that's when you get into problems of, not valuing what the public service does. So, we have taken that into consideration, certainly, in our bargaining and how we've structured the pension plan and some of the other things that we've done. But generally, we want to encourage people. It's when people ask me, because they look at me accusatorily and say, well, do you really think the public service is valuable? I say, absolutely. We need the public service. There's some great people. They do great things for Canada, in Canada and around the world. And I encourage young people to consider that as part of their career mix. So that's a long answer to a short question, but I think it accurately describes the situation.
Thank you.
Mr. Clement. My name is Kristen Landry, and this is my second year at the Bush School, and I have a question for you. What's your specific role in Canada's budgeting process? Is it more with implementation or preparation, or a little bit of everything?
Yeah, a little bit of both. We have a finance minister who delivers a budget, so that he's the one that holds the pen on the budget. But I have, particularly when we're trying to constrain, because I'm not on the spending side, I'm on the constrain side. So when we're looking at ways to constrain, then I have a role in the pre-budget activity. Then after the budget is delivered, my role is to make sure that particularly new programs of spending are consistent with the budget's aspirations and are consistent with good financial accounting and program accountability, and increasingly benchmarking. How do we define success? And to me, we have to do a lot better job. When I first got this role, I tell a story about how I was getting a presentation on a program, because we were doing program review, and I said, well, why is this a successful program? And the answer that came back from the programmers was, well, because everybody who gets money from this program really likes the program. And I said, that's not a good performance measure, okay? That doesn't tell me anything. Yeah, of course people who get money like getting money, but how do we define success in a bit more of a sophisticated way? So though I play a substantial role in times of restraint. I play a critical role at the front end, and then certainly after the budget is introduced in terms of rolling it out and making sure it is consistent. And I have an ongoing role, even post-budget, in looking for ways to reduce spending. So I have that ongoing responsibility. So even though the budget is set, if I can come up with an idea with my colleagues of how to reduce spending but deliver excellent service, then we do that. So one example recently is legal services. This was, cross-departmental. We're the largest buyer of legal services in the country. I'm sure the U.S. government is exactly the same. My wife is a lawyer, so I know that legal services are going through a revolution right now. It's a buyer's market, and lots of law firms have to deliver much better legal services at a much more accountable cost to the client. I know that, seeing from what my wife has to do to keep clients and get new clients and so on. And it occurred to me, if legal services is revolutionized in the private sector, why is it always the same in government? Why does it never change? And so we did launch with the Justice Minister a review of legal services, and right from the get-go we were able to find $50 million in savings and institute some things that are much more modern in their practices for legal services within government. So that's just one specific example of the ongoing role that I can play in better budgeting and better performance.
Andrew Hoffman, second year here as well. I was wondering if you could comment on the political feasibility of the cuts to public servants' sick days, especially the fact you're facing a surplus next year.
Yeah, yeah. So this is I'm into the next round of bargaining with our public service unions, and each side gets to put on the table some of the things that they want to see on the table, and the other side, of course, has some asks in terms of salaries and benefits and wages and these kinds of things. What I put on the table was transforming the sick leave system. And I did so, and this is all subject to bargaining, and we're sitting down and talking about it now. There's 27 different tables with 17 different bargaining agents, so it's quite complicated. But we are engaging simultaneously on all of those 27 fronts. But my basic point is that the current system, which is over 40 years old, is not serving the employees very well, and it's not serving the taxpayers very well. And the current system is based on banked sick days. So on average, every year, an employee would have 15 sick days, which if they don't use up, they can bank for future use. So my point is that encourages absenteeism, particularly as the person gets closer to the end of her or his term before retirement, because they see it as an entitlement, or some do, not all, some do, and they want to use them up before they lose them upon retirement. So all of a sudden, on Mondays and Fridays, they get sick a lot. This kind of thing happens. So that's a problem. The other side of the problem, though, which I feel very passionately about, is I don't think it's a good system for the employees. The research that we've done indicate that 2/3 of the employees don't have enough banked sick days if they're dealing with a meaningful illness in their lives. They haven't worked long enough to bank enough sick days, so they actually don't have enough sick days to deal with their problem, whether it's a cancer scare or whatever it is. They end up, having no income, or going on our employment insurance system because they don't have enough sick days. So I think that's bad for employees. I also think that a 40-year-old system doesn't properly understand mental health issues, because 40 years ago it was all stigmatized, and nowadays we can talk about it more and maybe intervene better and sooner. And I would like a system in place, furthermore, which is not in place with bankable sick days, where the incentive is to get the employee back to work healthier sooner. That should be the purpose of a sick day system, not keeping them off work for as long as they've got bankable sick days. So there has to be more accountability in the system as well. So let me just say that the unions have not taken well to this suggestion. So we're in the midst of bargaining. I'm an optimistic guy. That's why I'm in politics, I guess. So I'm hoping that we can find some solutions that'll work for both parties. But I'm pretty convinced that the system needs a massive overhaul. Basically moving to a system of short-term disability, which is very common in the private sector and works well, and is also common in other public sectors as well. So I'm not trying to leave them high and dry. I would replace bankable sick days with a sick leave system that is just, I think, has the right kind of signals to the employee and also helps them in their days or months of need.
Thank you, Mr. Clement. My name is Robert Hammerberg, and I'm a second-year student here at the Bush School. I'm interested to hear your views on social media and its use in government, whether or not you feel like it can better connect you to constituents, or the pros and cons of using social media and the government platform. And last I checked before we started, you have just under 48,000 Twitter followers.
Yeah, 42,000, but who's counting?
42,000.
Yeah. No, well, clearly, I'll answer it in terms of government, but also as a politician. In government, clearly, it has to be part of the menu of how you communicate and receive information from citizens. And so, now it's fairly common to have, a Facebook activity, a Twitter feed, other forms of social media to interact with people. And also, interestingly, I would say, interact with one another as public servants. This is the other side of it that people sometimes forget about. when you've got hundreds of thousands of public servants in a country as diverse as USA or as Canada, they don't all know one another, and they don't even actually know what each other is doing. And social media can actually be a way for them to connect with one another, and that cross-pollination that we all need to be innovative as a society. Definitely, social media has a role to play in that as well, but also with the citizenry. Having that direct contact with citizenry, and having I've done Google Hangouts, for instance, and the AMAs that President Obama has done, and others. All of that I think is useful to connect citizens again with government on a regular basis, and so it is critically part of that in a mature democracy like the USA and like Canada. I think there's been studies done already about the role of social media in non-mature democracies, places in transition like the Arab world, a couple of years ago, and Iran, during their post-election period a few years ago. So that's all ongoing and changing, but I think even in mature democracies like ours, it has a definite role to play. Let me put my politician's hat on, because I am a politician, and say, it's part of my work life. There's no question about it. It's a way, if I can communicate with 42,000 followers or however many I have directly on an issue I think is important, or I also say, for me, it gives me dimensionality, or what I call dimensionality, that I'm a three-dimensional human being. If I want to talk about, I went to the Black Keys concert last night, in Ottawa, and so I talked about the Black Keys. It doesn't have to be about my life just as a mono-dimensional politician. I can talk about the hockey scores. I can talk about whatever else I'm interested in, and give people that window into a multidimensional personality that we all are as human beings, not just me, of course. So it does serve those functions as well. I think there is a high cost to it, quite frankly, for politicians. Any celebrity, same, I don't get the kind of hate mail that Kanye gets, but it's pretty close. There are people who seem to delight in spending all of their time, 24 hours a day, commenting in a negative way on what you're doing. So there is that aspect of it too, but you have to kind of push beyond that and be accessible to people who want to have a serious conversation about serious issues. So it is part of our world now. I wouldn't want to be without it. It's also a great news aggregator. Let's face it, the way we get news now, especially breaking news, is more on social media than waiting for the morning paper the next morning. And so for a person like, I'm going to be on Twitter all throughout the ballot counting process in Scotland, I can assure you, today, and just to see what's going on there. And I'm not going to be waiting for the morning, Manchester Guardian to come out with the news. We're going to be checking, updating throughout the evening, I'm sure. So, and similarly in the U.S. presidential sweepstakes, we Canadians are keen observers of U.S. elections, especially presidential elections, and I just consume massive quantities of social media information on that, and every cycle, of course, it gets more sophisticated and more, multifaceted. So who knows what it's going to be like 2 years from now. So I hope that gives you a window into me as a politician, but also government institutions as well.
Mr. Clement, Blease Graham here. A question that sometimes comes up in class. We talk about many levels of budgeting in the United States, not only national but also state and local. How does that compare to budgeting in Canada?
Well, I would say this in terms of the Canadian context. Obviously, at municipal and provincial levels, they are responsible for their own budgets, but there are certain transfer payments that do occur from the federal treasury to provinces and to municipalities. To municipalities primarily on infrastructure. A lot of our infrastructure projects are one-third, one-third, one-third. Third at the local level, third contributed by the provincial government, and a third contributed by the federal government. So there's that kind of relationship with municipalities and the federal government. We don't, very differently from the United States perhaps, we don't contribute in any manner as a federal government to primary or secondary education. We don't regulate it. We don't fund it. It's not part of our constitutional mandate. So that's the province and their local school boards. So we don't have anything to do with that. Healthcare, big difference. And healthcare, which is primarily a provincial responsibility, the federal government does transfer payments to each province on a yearly basis, ever increasing amounts. It's been about 6% per year compounded for the last 8 years, aggregate increases, to each province to help pay the bill for healthcare. So to the extent that the federal government pays somewhere around 30 to 35%, if I'm not mistaken, of the healthcare bill that the provinces now spend. Now, much of that is with no strings attached. So as long as they comply with the Canada Health Act, which says, healthcare has to be accessible, universal, portable. There are 5 pillars. I just named 3 off the top of my head. There are 2 others. Public administration is the 4th one, and I can't remember the 5th one off the top of my head. I used to be a health minister, but that was 5 years ago. In any event, so as long as they are consistent with those 5 pillars of the Canada Health Act, the money just flows. So that's the kind of the primary relationship with the provinces is on infrastructure and healthcare and other social services as well. But the provinces, we're going to have a political debate. Once we reach a surplus, of course, everybody wants their piece of the surplus, right? And so the provinces are starting to gear up to say, we don't have enough money from our provincial tax base. You've got to give us more money because you're richer than we are, or we can't deliver excellent services to people in this province. So there is going to be that political debate, as there always has been historically in Canada.
Sometimes in class too, we talk about impediments to good budgeting, like log rolling or earmarking or pork barreling.
Yeah.
Many examples in the United States. Are there examples of such impediments in Canada?
Well, not per se, because of course, again, we have this fusion of executive and legislative. So the cabinet, the finance minister, and the cabinet craft the budget. The budget is then tabled in Parliament by the party that is the majority party. We're the majority party in Parliament, and we get to have 100% of the cabinet seats. So basically, if you're in our caucus, you're expected to vote for the budget. There might be other votes that are free votes or that are discretionary for the backbencher, but budgets are not those. So it gives us a lot more control over that kind of thing. There's no situation where an individual member of Parliament will say, I'll vote for the budget if you earmark this. It just doesn't happen. It's impossible to happen in our system. So I've heard that commentary that some Americans look wistfully at that, where there is a lot more top-down control, I'll tell you, by the executive branch and in particular by the Prime Minister on the process of government than the President would ever have under the current U.S. Constitution. So that's just the reality of the situation. And some people say, wow, when you're in the midst of a massive financial crisis, it's great to have all those levers. I can tell you that when you're in the opposition in Canada, you shake your fist at the unbounded control that the Prime Minister and the Cabinet control over public policy in this country. So it always depends on your perspective. And I always have a little bit of fun with my opposition friends, and I say, you only need to know 4 words in opposition. Just 4 words. Those jackasses did what? That's what you do in opposition. That's all you do. Righteous indignation is in full supply in opposition. But when you're in government, when you're in government, you got to govern, and we have the ability to do that for sure.
Mr. Clement, I think we've about exhausted the questions that we had in mind, so we'll defer to you for any final thoughts or comments.
Well, again, thank you for taking me in virtually here. I feel badly that I'm not there in person, but as I say, we did win the vote, by the way, the vote I was here for. We did win that vote. No big surprise there, perhaps. But I want to thank you for your interest in what Canada is doing. I know Canada is not very close to you, but I do thank you for that, and I wish you well in all of your studies. It's great that you're taking an interest in this from an academic but also a practical point of view, and it's been great having this dialogue with you.
It's been great for us too, and we're grateful to you for your time and all of your insights, and we look forward to talking more in a more informed way about budget, having had this experience with you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.